Hi, Tanvi, are you here?
Can you all hear?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you yet.
I think there is something. I can't hear you all. Something is off, probably.
You
Yes,
can't
now I
hear
can.
me?
Yes,
Okay, great.
let
Hi,
me
how are
now
you doing?
join on camera now. I just wanted to
Hi.
test audio and video first. Awesome.
Okay, understandable. So are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if we have the participants here joining us now. Great. So, good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Sarah, for tonight's Tech Talk. I hope everyone's doing great. So today I'm delighted to welcome Tanvi. I hope I'm saying that right. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. She's a senior manager of enterprise solution architecture at Amazon Web Services. And Tanvi has over 9 years of diverse experience in cloud computing and enterprise solutions. And having worked with top organizations such as Microsoft, today I'm very glad to hear her insights and learn from her vast experience. So, welcome, Tanvi, officially. How are you doing?
I am doing good. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to join today and probably share some insights based on my experience. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. So, before we dive into the questions, is there anything in particular that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, like probably just quickly introducing myself, right? Just based out of Dallas, Texas, outside of work. I'm a big dog lover. So anybody on the participant side is a dog lover. Hi there. Love pets, dogs, big into animals in general. So that's the fun part outside of work that I like to do. And of course, happy to be here. I'm excited to share the journey. And then just quick question around like, are we going to take questions from the participants or like, how are we going to be having the format?
So, we have prepared a few questions for you in advance,
Yeah.
and we will just start right ahead with those. And by the end of the session, if there is anyone who'd like to ask any questions, if that's okay with you, of course, we can go ahead and take those questions. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I just would like to ask the admin if it's okay that we can start. The participants have started joining. Okay. All right, let's dive straight into it then, Tanvi. So starting with the first question, what is the most critical role that a solutions architect plays in a cloud transformation project?
Yeah, I think it's not one, but the whole role itself is divided into multiple sections as the solution architect has the conversation with the customer, right? The first part of the solution architecture role, of course, starts by earning the trust with the customer. Right. And that is done by understanding the customer's operational challenges, or in general, what is the customer trying to achieve, what are the business strategies at the customer's side, and in general having an overall 360-degree understanding of the customer's business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once the solution architect has the business understanding, then they can layer the technology on top of it to then architect it in a way that is going to be the best possible architecture and a sustainable architecture for the customer amidst any large scale events or failures that might happen, right? So from
Mm-hmm.
a solution architecture role perspective, I would say that understanding business, right, which means that the solution architect having the business acumen, then being able to communicate the challenges that the customer is facing and aligning them to the solutions that they can provide is the second most important part. And then the third thing is following through with it, where it actually enters into that implementation phase and making
Mm-hmm.
sure that you're actually supporting your customer through that journey, not just by yourself, but by bringing in all the right parties into the picture, because there's a lot of moving parts that can go on when one use case starts from scratch and goes into production for the customer, right? And of course, the foundational aspect of a solution architect is the technical know-how, right? Depending on what technology the solution architect is targeting, right? Is it a deep dive technology, or is it more of a broader solution architecture role, or is it more of a field sales engineer kind of a role? All of these can be categorized into solution architecture depending on which organization you are working for, because each organization kind of defines it, the roles and responsibilities slightly differently. But having the technological foundation is ground zero, right? Like without that, all of the other pillars that we just spoke about are not going to happen.
I see. I understand. So there's like a step-by-step approach to everything, like you explained. So how do you approach designing a cloud architecture that aligns with an organization's, long-term goals?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And thank you for actually asking that question, because the critical part of the question that you asked is actually the starting point of the
Mm-hmm.
discussion we have
Yeah.
with the customers, right? Is how do you align it with the business priorities?
Mm-hmm.
So, for a solution architect or a solution architect leader like myself, the biggest part of our role is to start from that aspect where, okay, hey, customer, we are here for you, we are going to help you. But let's first understand your current pain points. How are you planning to solve those? Do you have any thoughts in your mind? And see if that then starts the circle of innovation or circle of problem solving in the customer's mind, right? That's the first track. The second track that happens is to understand the customer's vision, right? Because we also don't want to get stuck into the aspect of just always solving the current pain points and then just making it like a checkbox discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the current pain points, what I or my team do as solution architecture is to always think of anticipated problems that the customer may run into, to provide some future recommendations to bring that 360-degree perspective to their architecture, right? So, to just summarize and answer the question, I would divide the approach that I take for any customer's solution architecture discussion is current challenges, future
Mm-hmm.
vision, align them together, right? And then work backwards to create a solution, and then align the technology with it based on whatever technology you are working on, right? Be it a cloud technology, or be it like a out of the box solution that you might be building using the cloud technology, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so do you have any examples that you could provide us from your own experiences?
Yes, sure. So of course, I will not be able to reveal the exact details of the
Of course.
conversations or the customer names and so on and so forth. But in one of our recent conversations with the customers, we are seeing a lot of customers recently, of course, talking about generative AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to do generative AI, and everybody wants to move into that track of, okay, I want to increase productivity, or I want to probably create a chatbot, or I want to create like an automation layer to my technical support or my customer service kind of a situation, right? But to go to that aspect, we discovered that the underlying data is the most important aspect for any customer to be able to reach that stage of generative AI or build any
Mm-hmm.
chatbots, which is a regular use case that has now become of generative AI, right? And customers sometimes themselves are not aware that they don't have the right foundation to build um, a modernized application on top of that not so solid foundation. So while they are looking at the innovative, modernized solution, they were not aware that their underlying foundation of the data itself is not going to support their innovation, right? So that
Mhm.
is where we as the solution architecture team, we came into picture and we were like, hey, we do agree with you and we want to take you to that path of being in line with the new Gen AI kind of the technology that we have. But if you want to be successful in your implementation and have that implementation a more sustainable and long term, and then be able to even enhance that use case of generative AI further, you need to start by laying the right data foundations, removing any discrepancies in the data, trying to see how you can remove the silos of your data, right? And then we create a work backwards strategy for them. And then we created like a quote unquote project plan for it, right? So, what is a project plan that we will put in place over the period of the next 3 months or 4 months, depending on the scale of the project? And then we just finished that project probably in August, right? Which laid the data foundation for the customer. And then now we are starting to build those use cases for them. And when we did that data foundation, we made sure that we did it in a way where their operations and IT teams have the same data foundation. That way, otherwise, we were again going to run into the same issues where the teams were not aligned and the data was going to be siloed.
Well, you have partly answered my next question, but what are some key challenges that a solution architect like yourself faces during cloud transformation? Like, could you give like a brief overview one more time, please?
Yeah. So the brief challenges that we face, right, during these um, situations is probably sometimes what the customer is asking for is not an easy or readily available solution, right?
Mhm.
Then we will have to get creative to see how we can integrate some third party applications into the cloud and see how you can build it. So that becomes a very, very, very big challenge. And that is where actually the true solution architect shines out, right? And what I mean by that is like whatever are readily available solutions or whatever is an architecture that you can find, we all can build it through. But when we hit a roadblock where something has not been done and it's a very niche use case that a customer is looking for, that becomes so challenging. And especially if you're aligned to a smaller industry base, or if you're
Mhm.
aligned to a smaller geography, or if you're aligned to a mindset of a customer where their execs or organizations are not bought into the concept of the cloud, then things become more challenging. So that's the one aspect of it. The second aspect of the challenge that comes into picture is the third party stuff that I talked about, plus the feature unavailability that I talked about. The fourth thing is how you are going to rally all of the teams that are working on this architecture together
Mhm.
to deliver on a timely manner, right? Because as a solution architect, you are the single point of technical contact for your customer, but on the behind, sometimes you are managing so many threads, right, of um, programs that are going on to make that single initiative or use case or project happen for the customer, that you have to wear those multiple hats, right? And wearing that multiple hat is another additional roles and responsibility challenge for a solution architect, in addition to the technology challenge that the role itself brings to the table. Another challenge of the role is to always keep up to speed with the technology, right? Because
Mhm.
sometimes, not sometimes, most of the times, at least the customers that I have interacted with, they are even faster at knowing the technology than we are, you know? So sometimes I go into conversations and they will ask you about some technology and we will be like, oh, we are not aware
Mhm.
about it. Let's get back to you, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes even owning that conversation that you're not aware about it, you will get back to it, and trying to stay up to speed, that becomes challenging while juggling so many things together. I hope that kind of aligns with your
It
question.
does. It does. Yes. Thank you so much for getting into details about that again. I want to move on to my next question, which is slightly different than what I've talked about so far. So, what factors should be considered when choosing between a single cloud, multi-cloud, or hybrid cloud architecture?
Yeah, so that is a really great question, right? I wouldn't suggest that we should go, and this is just my very personal opinion from how I have seen people do things. And I think we should not go in with an opinion ourselves as a solution architect, whether it is a single cloud or a multi-cloud, or how they want to kind of run their environment. We should
Mhm.
always start by listening to the customer, right? I have myself in certain situations seen where the multi-cloud environment actually worked better, right? Rather than the single cloud, right? There are certain use cases where that made sense for the customer, maybe from a cost perspective, or maybe from a
Mhm.
licensing perspective, or maybe from a contract perspective, that they had already signed a contract with some other company, and then they wanted to keep running that infrastructure, and it was possible for some other cloud provider to enter and still keep the same licenses running, right? So
Mhm.
I would rather suggest that as a solution architect, don't go in with a cookie cutter kind of mentality in your head, right? If sometimes your customer is already multi-cloud or something like that, first try to understand why they are multi-cloud. Because if you try to push them out of multi-cloud to a single cloud, right? And if their leadership, or if their operational style, or um, their organizational vision is around multi-cloud, right? Then you are going to get pushback in a very bad way from the customer, and there is highly likely chance that you will lose the trust of the customer, which in turn is going to make you lose any other workloads which you are anyways going to get, right? So this
Mhm.
single cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud is a very tricky concept. And like on a technical front, we all know the definitions of each of those, right? Like we all are aware about the definitions. But when you actually go into the customer conversation, I would definitely say tread the water very carefully, understanding what is suitable for the customer without coming across like I am trying to push my strategy on you. And
Mhm.
that's just how probably I have been mentored or coached. Each business's style of operation will be different, but this is just from my experience, what I'm sharing with the team, that this
Mhm.
usually helps. So, like, there's a famous quote, right, that is public about Amazon, that we are not competitor obsessed, we go customer obsessed, right? So, that is where I am coming from. That, hey, if it is working for the customer, I am not going to go in there and forcefully try to do anything which will go against their mindset.
Mhm. I believe we have a raised hand. I would just like to point out that we will take your questions, but by the end of the session. So please bear with us. So moving on, Tanvi, how do solution architects ensure that security and compliance is, being regulated in cloud transformations?
Actually, for at least from my experience, right, like security and compliance is something that we talk about as solution architects, but there are tools and assessments that we conduct internally, right, with customers, that can be helpful to determine the security and compliance, because each region, each geography, each country, all of those things vary. And then more than the solution architecture, this compliance quote unquote thing is something that we recommend that the solution architecture, right? And again, I would say that this is very different in every organization. So what I'm specifically for this question, what I'm going to answer, take it with a grain of salt, right? Because as you and like as our audience enters into their prospective solution architect roles, this may or may not apply because this is a very
Mhm.
different topic and each org handles it very differently, right? But from my experience, what we do is we collaborate very closely with our account teams who actually own the responsibility of the revenue on the account, right? And then we engage internal teams who are specialized on compliance, security, and governance. And they also come into picture to do some checks, right? Like probably are they HIPAA compliant and so on and so forth, right? So they will do those checks with the customer. But from a
Mhm.
security and governance perspective, if a technical review needs to be done, then we have programs and frameworks that our own solution architects have designed for the cloud specific thing that I do, that they can go in and walk through with the customer, like how we are walking through right now, the discussion. We do the same thing and we can walk through that with the
Mhm.
customers and understand their footprint and then come up with some security and governance recommendations. But there is an involvement needed of specialists on that areas who can come together and operate with the solution architect on that side.
See, so how does, automation play a role during this entire process?
So you mean like automation for like governance or like automation of in general all of the
In general, well, if you'd like to be specific about it, please go ahead. But like I meant in general, like what role does automation play?
I would suggest it's the foundation of anything and everything that we do. And I would rather encourage, right? Like now I'm wearing my leader hat, removing slightly my SA hat, right? Wearing my leader hat, the push that I have for my team is to do automation wherever possible, right?
Hmm.
Be it on internal processes or be it on the architecture or the technical advisory that we are doing for our customers, right?
Hmm.
And why I say that is because going back to the initial couple of questions that we spoke about, right? If a solution architect's job, right, is to be a trusted technical advisor for the customer, then the customer is expecting a seamless experience plus a simplistic experience with minimal overhead for whatever use case they are technically trying to build, either using the cloud or whatever with the solution architect. And all of these simplistic and time reducing use cases, all of them, the foundation is automation, right? So you can automate your normal operational processes of just collecting the data that can be automated. Then you can do your reporting to be automated, right? Then you can do simplistic, like we recently automated one thing for our customers where they were trying to kind of even do some of their customer intakes for requests
Hmm.
that they were getting for one of the industry verticals that I support very manually. But it is so easy to sometimes simplistically automate those. It doesn't require like rocket science or architecture sometimes, or a
Hmm.
solution architect brain. But automation saved them a lot of time, which in turn, if you consider that head count wise, right? If one person is spending 2 hours on that manual task, and if that person is paid $1 per hour for simplistic purposes, then you are saving $2, right, for the company. And at the larger scale, you can imagine how many dollars they would be saved.
Great, that's quite informative. Thank you for, highlighting that. So I'd like to move on to my next question. So tell me, how do you personally balance the trade-offs between performance, cost, and scalability? I assume
Ooh.
everybody is really excited to hear that.
Performance, cost, and scalability, right? It is for me, right? If now I will wear a customer hat, first,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I will put on a solution architect hat. If I am a customer and I have decent amount of funds that I can invest into the cloud and I want to modernize my infrastructure, I would always go for performance, right? Because the initial investment um, in the performance may look slightly higher in my experience, but the performance or the high speed computing, quote unquote, if you want to call like that, right, for simplistic conversation purposes, then that can help with the scalability also, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you target performance, you can target performance and scalability, but for that you have to give up cost as the customer because high performance stuff is going to be expensive in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I now wear sales hat, right, there are packages and deals that sales can do, which is not solution architecture, but they can do to help the customer and see like how they can help. But that's outside of the solution architecture discussion, right? As a solution architect, though, if you were asked this question of like cost, performance, and scalability, I usually recommend creating a playbook for yourself, right? Because based on the role of a solution architecture that you are playing, you know what are the type of customers that you are dealing with, what are their organizational priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you also know what is your organization looking like and what are your business priorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your business is more revenue focused, then you might want to create a playbook that will slightly help your customers tilt their heads towards high performance so that you can get back your cost and revenue to fulfill your own organization's business KPIs too, right? Because at the end of the day, when we work with customers, we want to fulfill their goals, but tie that thread back to our own organizational goals also, right? So these three things of cost, performance, and scalability, these are perfect for a solution architect to think of and tie them back to their own business goals that they are supporting at their organization. And then, if your organization is more cost revenue driven, see how your playbook can get your customers to change your mind in that direction. If that is not the case, then work with your customers to understand why they are preferring certain things. And then
Mm-hmm.
your playbook should have a list of why questions, right? Because customers, most of the times I have seen, um, enter into the cost savings mode very easily, right? But if you paint the art of possible picture for the customer, which is also a big part of the solution architecture role, then you can get them to by themselves through your quote unquote why questions start thinking of like why do you want to optimize cost in this area, right? What prompted you to kind of think of cost optimization, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you cost optimize in this area, what are some of the sacrifices that you are doing for your business? Are you ready to do those kind of sacrifices for the business? Is this short term thinking? Is this mid term thinking? Is this long term thinking, right? And if it is short term and we eventually want to create like a long term plan to scale and build more, it's a completely different story, right? But as you start asking more and more of these questions, I think we ourselves unblock from the mindset block of cost, performance, or scalability. So, my short answer is as a solution architect, again, similar to the hybrid cloud, multi cloud answer, don't choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Redirect the customer
Yeah.
through your thought process to make them choose their own um, choice. But at the back of the mind, keep in mind your own business goals too, but don't force your customer to run in
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you would eventually say that it's personal and it can vary person to person. I
Yeah,
see.
and org to org, more than personal, it's very customer based and it's very organization based, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
from the place where I come, if customer wants to cost optimize, we will sacrifice our own business revenue for the customer. That's the
Mhm.
way we function. But each org's business priorities and goals are a bit different.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to my next question. So, what best practices do you recommend for ensuring data integrity and availability during cloud migration?
Yeah, firstly, backups, right? Like I just was on a call this weekend with a customer where some of the things we were working through were not um, the right things, right? And that is exactly the job of a solution architect, right?
Mm.
Cloud migrations are the most common use cases that a solution architect will work on, right? And during those cloud migration use cases, architecting for failover is the biggest concept that I would suggest the team on the call today to go back and study, right? And architecting for failover is available in general through all cloud providers, all through in general as an online material, but it is worth a read because it has so many components, right? Like you want your applications to be architected for failure. You want your entire setup to be architected for failure. Sometimes customers have multiple data centers, but they want only one data center to be migrated, and
Mhm.
the other data center has to be a failover of their migration to the cloud, right? And so on and so forth. So in those situations, I would suggest the team should take a look at best practices for architecting for failovers. And there is a well architected review, and each company calls it differently. But the underlying foundation is how to be a solution architect that can do well architected, right? Because there are multiple
Mhm.
pillars of well architected that cover operational, security, governance, and so on and so forth, which exactly together makes the customer's infrastructure tied together so that
Mhm.
in the events of any unfortunate outage or anything like that, the system is self-functional to fail over.
Okay. Okay. So we've spoken about, security, we've talked about performance, cost, and etc. So now I want to talk about innovation. So
Hmm.
what are the most, or let me put it this way, in what ways can a solution architect drive innovation within a cloud environment?
Ooh, this is my favorite topic. Innovation
Okay.
is
We
something
should have
that
gotten to that sooner then.
no, 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 this is awesome. And we are doing good on time, right? So let me know if I'm
Yes,
going
we're
to.
good. No,
Okay.
no worries.
Um, So yeah, I mean, innovation, I think outside of solution architecture in general for the technical brains out here, right? Like you should never ever stop thinking of
Mhm.
innovation, but simplistic innovation, right? And funneling it down to solution architecture. What I have most commonly observed is solution architects think that they need to build this big ship of things for the customer, then only it will fall under innovation. No. But like
Mm.
I said, automating small intake processes, automating and removing small data silos, and helping build some probably integrated BI reports, right? That can also be innovation for the type of customer that you are dealing with, right? So
Mhm.
for a solution architecture, everything and anything revolves around your customer. So if you understand your customer and their pain points, then you can innovate, right? And the biggest um, pitfall, right? Pitfall is the word that I was looking for. The biggest pitfall for a solution architect is to just think in a black box about innovation, right? And that is why in this entire call, you might hear me stressing a lot on understanding the customer, because innovation, security, governance, cloud type of cloud recommendations, failover recommendations, everything and anything is all revolving around the customer, right? And if you don't understand that, you might be the best developer in the entire company, and you might be able to build apps left, right, and center like a developer.
Mhm.
But if that app is not aligned to the customer's business, then your innovation is of no use.
Mhm. Yeah, great point. If you want to talk more about innovation, you can. Or do you want me to move on to the next question?
I can do a couple of more things about innovation.
Okay, sure.
Actually, right? And as you're innovating, and these are more like best practices. So if I'm going off track, let me know. But I just want to like very openly share with the team here the things that I have learned over my small share of experience that I have.
Mhm.
Um, with innovation, it's very easy to fall into the trap of once again like eating the entire piece of cake at the same time, right? I would rather cut it into smaller pieces, right? And see and test regularly along the way on how each phase is working of the innovation, and then during each phase also make sure that whatever our North Star for the innovation problem statement solving was still is valid, right?
Mhm.
Because this is a lesson learned in this new post-COVID environment, that things change so often that by the time we start on an innovation strategy to ending on an innovation strategy, the business dynamics have changed so much that innovation at the start to the end becomes irrelevant.
Mhm. Yeah,
So doing regular checkpoints during innovation is a best practice, and
keeping up
especially
to
in the
date.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to my next question. So, what skills are essential for a solution architect to be successful? I think this would be best to keep for the end, don't you think?
Sure, sure.
Okay,
Yeah, we
let's
could
move
do that.
on to my next question.
Sure.
So, how does a solution architect collaborate with other teams, such as DevOps and security, during cloud transformation?
Nice question. Collaboration for a solution architect is the key, right? Because solution architect is the single threaded leader of the entire migration or use case or whatever the customer is asking for. And if the solution architect is not somebody who is a personality that can work with different teams and different people and so on and so forth, then it might not work for the overall process, right? So this cross collaboration is extremely important. So how they collaborate, right, is basically this is how I do it. Again, might be different in different organizations. I just take the team with me. Right. So if you
Mm-hmm.
need a DevOps person, or if you need somebody who is a storage expert, or if you need somebody who is a Docker expert or a container expert or whatever, right? I just take them with me to the customer, right? Because we don't believe in like relaying messages through.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather not be the person to relay an expert's message, because I am not the expert at that point in time. I would rather take the expert along with me to the calls, and then that expert can speak to the customer's questions, and they can resolve their queries on the fly, right? And that's just the easiest way for a solution architect to collaborate. And for that,
Mm-hmm.
solution architect themselves need to have a very deep understanding of the problem statement, because the problem statement is something that the solution architect captures from the customer, and then they take it back to the expert, right? For DevOps or containers or whatever it is, right? And then, if the solution architect is not able to effectively translate that problem statement to the expert, then we break the connection, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
this part is most important. And then you can take your expert with you to the call, and then that's all good. But avoid being the messenger as much as possible, because that causes confusion.
Great answer. I'm in awe. Great answer. So, moving on. What role does a solution architecture play in ensuring business continuity during cloud migration?
Yeah. a very critical role is a simplistic answer, right? Because again, going everything is sent, like if we have to summarize, right, whatever we have discussed up until now, every the listeners might have understood that um, everything is centered around how solution architects are willing to work with customers and how they are internally collaborating, right? And for business continuity and how they wear multiple hats. So business continuity question that you just posed to me, it goes back to our earlier discussion where we spoke about that solution architects have to wear the hat of a program manager sometimes, right?
Hmm.
And that is how you ensure that business continuity, be it during a cloud migration or be it during customer changes, right? Like sometimes you shift from one customer to the other as a solution architecture. That time also you cannot disrupt the business for the customer, or somebody leaves an organization, we have to bring in somebody else, and so on and
Mhm.
so forth, right? So in general, the concept of business continuity is extremely important, and solution architect is a very critical role there because they are tied one on one, at least in my experience, to customers. So they have a really good relationship that they build along the way to the with the customer, which becomes critical for anybody newer to come in and start taking over, and which is why that business continuity is important. Now how you maintain that is by, again, I am a big fan of playbooks, right? I have like playbooks for not extensive playbooks, right? Like they can even sometimes be like quick flashcard kind of playbooks in a document, right?
Mhm.
Um, so if we are doing kind of a migration, right? Like what are we migrating? What is the plan? What is the cost involved in the migration? What is the timeline? Is there any partner who is going to be engaged? Is there any vendor who is helping us through this migration, right? And then we document all of that, and whatever CRM tool your company may be using, you should definitely keep all of these documents centralized into that CRM tool, because if tomorrow any salesperson changes or if any solution architect changes, that CRM tool should be your single point of contact, or it should be your central repository to retrieve all of your customer information, be it related to their revenue, be it related to their migrations, anything like that.
Let's see. I know we've spoken a little bit about scalability, but can you just, highlight a little bit more when we talk about the key considerations when designing cloud architecture for scalability and future growth?
Yeah. So everybody here might have heard about the concept of like availability zones and regions and so on and so forth, right? And each cloud provider names them in a different way, right? So I'm
Mhm.
talking more from my own cloud providers experience here, right? So when it comes to scalability of the infrastructure, I think on the technical side, the global infrastructure or the resiliency are the two advantages of cloud computing, right? So if now we are diving into the basics of cloud computing a bit and deviating from the solution architecture side of the world, so that to achieve that scalability, I think taking advantage of cloud computing being that loaning infrastructure, right? That people can quote unquote loan to run their infrastructure across multiple geographies. I think that is the best way to define scalability for a solution architect, right? So I think that's how I would recommend people to go for scalability. Scalability in general, I would say, is a very vast topic and
Mhm.
requires its own deep dive, right? And scalability can uh, also comprise of a lot of other topics, right? Like, what are you trying to do for scalability? Are you just trying to scale your infrastructure within a certain geography? Are you trying to just make sure that your current infrastructure will be highly available? Are you trying to say that your business is going to grow from like North America to EMEA to Asia Pacific and so on and so forth? So scalability can be multiple things, right? And again, when a solution architect goes into a customer conversation and let's say they start talking about asking the question to the customer of how well architected is your current infrastructure, then scalability, future growth, the current business challenge, any operational stuff, all of that gets covered in that. And in scalability they will have multiple layers that we can go through to kind of um, peel the onion a bit further on scalability. But in general, scalability in the cloud itself is a big, big, big topic and can be dissected probably in multiple areas, depending on
Mhm.
how and what exactly the solution architect is positioned or deployed to do.
Okay. Now I'd like to ask one of my favorite questions so far. So, what strategies do you use to ensure that the cloud architecture is resilient against failures or potential failures?
Wow. Amazing, amazing question. Firstly, security. People don't think of failures like and thank you so much for asking this question. And I know
Of
why this is
course.
your favorite question because it's a very important question as a solution architect to know about, right? So when architecting for failover, people usually think that, oh, we need to scale the infrastructure, which means that it needs to be high availability, which means that if one thing goes down, the other should
Mhm.
automatically be able to come up and so on and so forth, right? Like that's the standardized way of how people will architect for resilience or high availability, right? Quote unquote, tying back to your question. But I would suggest, in addition to that, security is the foundation of all of these use cases that we have spoken about. Because if your network and your security and your firewalls and your gateways and your virtual private clouds that you set up within your cloud infrastructure, if they are not secure enough, then you are first going to be hit by something that will cause your infrastructure to go down, right? So I think whenever you build anything, firstly keep security in mind, strict
Mhm.
guardrails around it, make sure that you are tightening your infrastructure for it. And then once that is taken care of, then you have to make sure that what does high availability mean for you and your organization, right? Like how many regions you want to do it for, right? Then other thing is how much of backup you want to maintain, right? How much of storage backup you want to maintain, or how much of that backup is going to be valuable for you. What type of backups do you want to do, right? Do you want to create a script that is going to occasionally delete certain level of backup so that you can get into more of a cost optimization side as well,
Mhm.
right? So these are a couple of things that the teams can keep in mind so that they can kind of uh, think of high availability, right? So if I have to summarize your answer, it will be first think of security. Second thing is usual stuff, right? Like multiple region infrastructure, multiple availability zone infrastructure. Backing up your data is most important, right? But data backups can get a bit tricky in terms of cost. So figure out like what type of intra data transfer costs also you are facing when you're trying
Mhm.
to transfer the data between the regions. That's one thing for high failover, right? Or high availability. Then doing the data backups, right? The backups also get charged. So what types of backups you need, for which application data you need the backup, right? And then which ones can probably be deleted on a regular basis just to save you the cost. And I think these are a couple of things to keep in mind. And overall normal three-tier web architecture, right? Like if we are very familiar with a normal high three-tier web architecture architected for failover, then I think we are good, right? Because they do take care of like incoming traffic, where that incoming traffic is hitting, is that hitting a secured wall or not, right? And what type of traffic is entering, is it getting filtered, and then how is it traveling through the network to make it to the use case of the application, right?
Mhm. I had a hunch that security might be top three, so I'm glad that it came out to be on top. Moving on, I'd like to start summing up, and then I'd like to go ahead and ask, if somebody has any questions. So, how do you incorporate AI and machine learning into cloud architecture? I'm sure this is also going to be people's favorite question because it includes AI and machine learning.
Yeah. Uh, it was always there, like my take on this question is that AI and um, machine learning in some capacity have always been there, right? In the architecture of most use cases that we see,
Mhm.
right? So if you look at some of the use cases where how Amazon fulfillment centers track their packages, right? Internally. That is all robotics and machine learning, right?
Mhm.
How we are making sure that our prime trucks and packages get delivered on time. That is all AI and machine learning at the end of the day, right? So all of these architectures or any shipping or logistics company to that extent who does a similar business, right? They have been using some kind of machine learning algorithms for a long time now, right? So to answer your question, that is how we incorporate that, right? Like machine learning is mainly incorporated to see how we can simplify some of these complex tasks, right? Because you can imagine the scale at which some of these packages are there in these large fulfillment centers, and you don't want to receive my package, right? And I don't want to receive your package. So the automated network needs to understand that my package needs to come to me and your package needs to go to you. So if we are living in two different states, then those assembly line belts that go in the fulfillment center, they need to be aligned in a certain manner, right? So all of these are machine learning algorithms that help the packet routing on those belts in a fulfillment center, right? So that is how we day to day use it in an architecture too.
Mhm.
In terms of machine learning and AI, but it was never so much highly talked about until recently, where people have now started um, very easily or very peculiarly noticing that, oh, this seems to be an AI use case. Oh, this seems to be a machine learning use case. Now, is this more of a traditional AI ML use case, or is there a scope for it to extend to more of the generative AI use case where now we are using this traditional data that we had collected using our AI ML, traditional AI ML algorithms to train the models to now become more highly sophisticated for us to use.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'm personally happy to know that. Now, I'd like to move on to my last question that we, skipped earlier. So, what skills are essential for solution architects to be successful in cloud transformation, and in particular, cloud transformation projects?
Yeah, understand the breadth of the technology, right? Um, be an expert in general on understanding how the cloud functions, right? Understand cloud computing, and you can focus on any cloud, right? Like if you want to dive into Oracle, if you want to dive into AWS, if you want to dive into GCP, right? Depends on what you are trying to achieve at that point in time. But having that foundational knowledge, you can do it through certifications, you can do it through hands-on labs or whatever, right? But understanding of how different components of a cloud, right? Like how storage, networking, right? They interact with each other, how the application layer can be layered on top of these layers, and how then eventually these can be scaled to become bigger and bigger is something that is foundational for a solution architect. But because if you don't understand those foundational concepts, you might not be able to explain or translate that to a wider audience who may or may not be as technically close to the infrastructure as you are, right? So that knowing that technical stuff is extremely important as a solution architect. After that, communication skills, right? Like I said, you have to be able to bring your point across the table, because at the end of the day, you're convincing somebody to go through a cloud transformation, right? So that's the second most important skill. And third most important skill is understanding of your own business, and which in turn helps you to understand the customer's business, which in turn will help you to build the right architected solutions, and also bring in the right people to help the customer, right? It is not necessary that as a solution architect, one skill that you don't need is that you don't need to be the know-it-all person. You need to be the person that gives your customer the confidence that, okay, I have this person with whom I know I'm going to sail through.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much, Tanvi, for answering all my questions. I'd like to go ahead and ask our viewers, if you have any questions, you can always either, write it in the chat or turn your microphones on. Let's see if they have any questions. If not, then thank you so much, Tanvi, for joining us today and answering our questions. And it was really, really informative. I'm speaking for myself as someone who does not really have a very extensive background in the field. The way you explained everything was pretty, oh, we do have someone. So can you please go ahead and write your question in the chat? I believe it was Michael. I'm unable to see it again. So it's Mitch. Oops. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Mitch, you can just
Hi.
turn your microphone on. Hi, how are
Hello.
you doing?
Hi. No, nice to meet you guys. No, it's Michael. I just put Mitch. But no, it's
Okay.
Michael.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yes.
Michael.
Yeah. I'm very new to this space. I'm an architect, but I'm moving into cloud. To become a cloud engineer. I'm currently working towards my solutions architects and my practitioner exams. And what I'm finding is there's a wealth of information. There's so much information. And you're getting told to, take on labs, learn the material. It's really difficult to sort of divide your time. So I guess the question is, how did you sort of approach your sort of like personal studies? How did you divide the practicality of building projects versus, personal like kind of like theoretical research? Um, that's around that really. Be good to know.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Mitch.
Michael.
All
Tanvi,
right.
over to you.
No, thank you. Thank you. That's a really, really great question, right? I would suggest that prioritization would be key there, right?
Mm.
I am somebody who something fits in my brain only if I do it, right? Or if I talk through it with somebody, or if somebody asks me a question about it and then I go do a deep dive by myself, then it will fit in my brain for a longer time. If you keep me in front of a book for hours together, nothing is going in for me, right? So you have to figure out what type of learning methodology as such works for you, and then prioritize those first. So if you're a builder mentality kind of a person, then I would say breaking things and fixing them is the best way to learn. Then you don't need any certification at that point in time, because certifications would be very theoretical. Whereas if you make and break things and fix it, you already have the hands-on experience, then the certification study will only become a checkbox, or you may not even have to study. You can just do the practice tests and then kind of go from there. So if, or on the flip side, if you are somebody like, I have a friend who is more into like theoretical studies, and then that works for her, right? So she can go and do more certifications. So if you are that type of a person, I would prioritize certifications first, right? But don't do builder and certification both together. What I would suggest, if you're doing certification, do certification, and that too for a single cloud provider or a single technology or a single deep dive that you are passionate about, right? If you try to go across all cloud providers or across all technologies, then that's not going to help.
No,
Great,
thank you so
thank you.
much. Thank you.
Do you have any further questions, Michael?
No, no, that's it. For now, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. So do we have anybody else who would like to ask something? Let's just give it a minute, because it might be. Okay, well, if we do not have any further questions, then Tanvi, I would like to thank you one more time. Oh, Edward. Yes, Edward. Sorry. Yeah, there you go. You can just, turn your mic on and ask your question, Edward.
Hey, good evening. Thanks so much. Yeah, I had dropped a question in the Q&A a few minutes ago, but I'm a new undergrad student to the information system space, and really looking at different careers right now. Solutions architect is something that I'm looking into. So just wondering if you would have any advice to, someone just joining this field.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not familiar with what type of coursework you have gone through in your undergrad info system coursework, but if not, I would start by doing probably a cloud practitioner examination, or studying for it at least, right? And see if that is something that is getting you excited, passionate, yes, no kind of a feel for it. And then if it is a yes, then probably similar to what I told Michael earlier, you can decide if you are more of a builder person or more of a theoretical person, then you can go from there, right? The other thing that helps me is I like to see these YouTube videos, right? Most of the cloud providers or these training websites, right? Like they have people where they come in and talk about their experiences working with customers or architecting for customers. You can just go on YouTube and search for those kind of use cases and how they kind of do their jobs. And if what they are doing is something that you feel passionate about, then it's totally worth to start like peeling the onion further in this industry. But if that's something like, it's too salesy for me, or it's too technical for me, I would rather go do proper software development than having a halfway between software development and business discussions, then it will give you a feel for it.
No, sweet, understood. Yeah, I really appreciate those tidbits. I'm not really a developer guy, but I have a pretty varied skill set, so I will look into that exam. I appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Edward. I believe, Selena, you have a question. You can unmute and, go ahead.
Quick question. Is this recorded? So will we be able to get a recording of this?
Yes, you can.
Oh, good.
You can watch it over again on YouTube, or you can just follow our website and follow a link there.
Okay, baby, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Do we have anybody else who would like to ask anything? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tanvi, for your time and for all the questions that you've answered. It was very informative. Thank you so much once again for joining Clarusway. Yes, we have forwarded a YouTube link in the chat. You can just go ahead and watch the recording once again, or you could just visit our website and find the link again. So thank you so much, Tanvi, and I bid you a very good evening. And it was lovely to have you here. And we're hoping to have you with Clarusway one more time.
Of course, it would be my pleasure. Feel free to let me know what else you might need from me. And thank
Of
you to
course.
everybody who joined live and might watch the recording as well. Let us know if there's any feedback too, and we can make changes along the way. It has been a pleasure. And I wish everybody on the call a great evening, morning, depending on wherever they are dialing in from.
Yes. Same good evening or good morning to everybody else. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we will be hoping to see you again. Goodbye, Tanvi.